I'm Alma Lee. I'm a psychotherapist and transformative lifestyle resiliency coach and author, and I want to help you reach your goals by teaching you how to step outside of those fear-based mindsets and into your powerful, loving self. Let's get started. I don't think anyone listening would argue with me to say that emotions can be scary. Feeling one's own emotions brings out an internal feeling of being out of control, and it probably is a reminder of our powerlessness as children, and that's obviously something that we as adults tend to shy away from. And a big marker that I see in adults is the avoidance of feeling one's own emotions. And that ties into the topic of emotional intelligence. So what is emotional intelligence? Maybe you've heard of it before. Honestly, I hadn't heard of emotional intelligence since I think probably in my late 20s, early 30s was when it became a thing. It was something that was discussed briefly in my undergrad program, which my undergrad is in criminal justice administration and police work and law enforcement. And I just remember touching on it very briefly. Interestingly enough, when I was going to school for my bachelor's degree, I was also working for the TSA. And I want to kind of encapsulate this episode with a storyline to kind of give you a snapshot of what I'm talking about. And also my own experience in learning about emotional intelligence, and especially why it is so critical. It's devastating to interpersonal relationships if you are not attuned to your own sense of emotional intelligence. But stick around. Let me give you a story here. So several years ago, in my much more younger formative years, I was fortunately hired as a checkpoint supervisor with the brand new Transportation Security Administration. Back then it was under the Department of Transportation before they transitioned over to Department of Homeland Security. Anyway, so here I am running a security checkpoint at the airport. I'm 29 years old, all right? This has been my first real experience with leadership. I was an assistant manager at McDonald's in high school, but that's not anything that I really relate to as far as leadership. But anyway, I was in charge of the checkpoint, and mainly my job was to make sure that threats, weapons, things like that didn't come through the screening process. And I was also there to manage the employees. Now, given the fact that I was such a young person in such a brand new leadership role, keep in mind, my screening workforce was comprised of people that were my parents' age and older. So kind of hang on to that. So one day, I was called over to the x-ray machine and was told, hey, take a look at this, this item or whatever. And I come to find out there was a small pocket knife that one of my screeners had missed. And one of the other screeners called me over to look in the bag and said, hey, this person was on the x-ray machine. This is not what I was looking for, but I happened to find it in the bag check. So again, keeping in mind, emotional intelligence, right? There's a long line of passengers, right? And they're within earshot of what I'm doing as the manager. I walk over to my screener who's operating the x-ray machine. Now, this woman is my mother's age. And she was very shy, and she kept to herself. She did a good job most of the time. Obviously, she's a human, just like we all are. And because I'm the supervisor, right? I'm the one that's responsible for the threats coming through that checkpoint. We can't have these threats going through here. So obviously, because I'm her supervisor, I must remind her that she needs to do a better job. Now, that's a very logical assessment of how to handle that situation. So, using logic, and because that's my responsibility, right? This is how my mind was operating at the time. I walk up to her, and with all of these passengers that are standing within earshot, I correct her behavior. You know where this is going, right? Stick with me. It gets better. So she, behind the x-ray machine, looks at me with tear-filled eyes, and she gets up and runs off the checkpoint. And I'm like, oh, well, now I've got another problem to fix, because now she's being insubordinate by not doing her job. So I'm not thinking anything else other than the fact that as her manager, as her supervisor, I'm going to have to write her up now for this behavior. So I make a note of it. I apologize. I ask another screener to take over the x-ray machine, and we keep it moving. We keep doing our job. It did not even enter into my mind anything other than I had done my job as the manager. So the phone on the checkpoint rings, and it's my boss, the security director. And I can say John. I love John. Shout out to John. So he says, hey, when it slows down, when you get done with that, do me a favor and swing up here when you get a chance, okay? I didn't think anything of it. I didn't even put two and two together, because he called the checkpoint all the time. Sometimes we would just hang out and drink coffee and BS, because we had such a great relationship. He was such a formidable influence in me, in my leadership style, and you'll see why here in a moment. So when everything slows down, I go up to his office, I walk in, and he says, hey, kid, have a seat. Shut the door. So I'm like, okay, what's going on? He says, hey, let me ask you something. What happened today? I was like, oh, she came up to tell you, right? He goes, yeah, she stopped by. He's like, but I want to know what your side is. And unbeknownst to me, I'm thinking once I tell him what happened, he's going to totally agree with me, right? He's going to completely agree with how I handled it. I said, well, she missed a threat. There was a small pocket knife. So-and-so was doing a bag check. That was not the threat that the bag check was the reason for, but they happened to find it, so I had to call her attention to it. And he's like, okay. He goes, and then what happened? I said, well, she ran off the checkpoint, so now she's going to have to get written up. He goes, I see. He goes, let me ask you a question. He said, just, and this, John was awesome. John was such an awesome, obviously he'd been a leader in many capacities over years and years. And he said, hey, do you think maybe you could have handled that a little differently? And I was like, well, I was a little bit taken aback by the question, but he says, think about it. He goes, how else do you think you could have handled that? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. And he says, well, he goes, how do you think she felt? And so what he did was he broke it down piece by piece, and he allowed me, without throwing it into my face, because looking back now, John was using emotional intelligence to communicate and teach me and train me up to be a better supervisor. He could have easily treated me the same way I treated the screener. And then it clicked. And I was like, well, I didn't even think about that, because I'm the supervisor. I thought, oh, I need to correct the situation. He goes, yeah, I get it. He goes, on paper, you did the right thing. He said, but you hurt her. You embarrassed her. Do you think that she felt humiliated because you corrected her in front of the passengers? And I was like, holy crap, I didn't even think about that. He goes, obviously. We shared a chuckle. He goes, listen. He goes, I'm not going to tell you how you should handle this, because he goes, I have faith in you to do the right thing. And that was his leadership style. And so I thought about it, and our shift didn't end for maybe another couple of hours. But obviously, the screener, she left the checkpoint. She didn't go home. She was still there. And and I thought about it. I thought, gosh, I embarrassed her. I could have, nobody got hurt. The threat didn't get through the checkpoint. And I could have pulled her aside and said, hey, you missed that little pocket knife. Just, maybe slow it down next time. Don't feel so pressured that you got to push those bags through so much. And if you're not 100% sure, always ask me for help, because I'll be happy to come up and give you an extra pair of eyes on whatever it is that you're looking at. I could have handled it that way. And in my realization, I recognized that I had a responsibility to my screeners to treat them fairly and with dignity and respect. And by utilizing emotional intelligence, I would not have done that. If I had employed emotional intelligence by taking into consideration my screener's feelings and put those as a priority as much as checkpoint security, then that wouldn't have happened, because she and I would have had an opportunity to have a conversation about it. I would have been able to correct the situation without the resulting humiliation that she experienced. So it was a big lesson that I learned It was a fundamental shift in how I choose to lead moving forward. So at the end of the day, when we did we did like a little staffing at the end of the day where, shift change and all that good stuff. And when she was there, I apologized to her in front of everybody, and she gave me a hug, and we talked it out. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me to learn the value of being emotionally intelligent. And so maybe listening to that story, can you think of something or a situation in your life where you could have taken into consideration the thoughts, the feelings of the other person that you're interacting with, and maybe worked in that capacity to come to an agreeable conclusion where nobody feels hurt or humiliated? It is something that I do see often in my work, especially in the community that I work in. The community that I work in is very, very vital, and there's an enormous amount of people that I work with that are consistently under so much pressure, not just to do their job correctly, but if they don't do their job correctly, people get hurt. So a lot of times emotions are not even on the table to consider because it's, a life or death situation. But in those circumstances, when you are in a relationship, a connection with another human being, emotional intelligence is critical and key. We're a community. We're a community. We need other people. We cannot operate in a solitary vacuum. We have to have relationships with other people. And in order for those relationships to be healthy, we have to use emotional intelligence. Now, what is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is basically, it's the ability to recognize, to understand, to manage, and use your emotions and the emotions of other people effectively to relate to one another. When you take into consideration how someone else feels and you use their emotions as part of your communication with them, then you're reaching out essentially and you're connecting. You're connecting with that person. When you don't take into consideration the emotions of somebody that you're trying to connect with, then it's like a plate of glass between the two of you. You're not going to be able to fully connect. You're just not. If you don't take and use that as your rationale to consider how they're going to emotionally respond to what you're saying or how you're trying to connect with them. So emotional intelligence is basically just that, is being self-aware of your own emotions and aware of the emotions in other people, managing them effectively, and also using them as the conduit, as the fundamental way that you choose to connect with them. And that's a hard thing to do. Like what I was saying in the beginning, is that emotions can be scary, especially if you as a high-functioning adult, somebody who does their job really well. And when you think about your childhood, for instance, and you look at that little girl or that little boy and you think, oh God, man, when I was a little kid, I didn't have any power at all. I was crying all the time. I felt scared all the time. And I never, ever want to go back to that space, because for me as an adult, that's the most terrifying thing in the world. So what a lot of people do, what a lot of adults do, is they just completely take emotions off the table. And sometimes they will use the justification of that life or death workload, where I have to do a job effectively or people die, as the justification of not being in touch with their emotions or the emotions of other people. Is that you? Am I pointing a finger at you? Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. So that's essentially why it's important. It's important because don't you want to be able to connect and resonate in relationships with other people? And it doesn't have to be so scary. It really doesn't. I've done this work for well over 10 years, and I can tell you right now that the moment that you face your fears, especially when you face the scary emotions that have kind of kept you in lockstep and doing things the way you've been doing them, and maybe it hasn't worked, if you think about your relationships with other people, this is an opportunity for you to sit back and sort of, stare the dragon down. But when you do that, and when you face your fears, especially when you face those emotions and you allow yourself to be vulnerable to those emotions, you realize it's not that scary at all. Not only that, but you realize that you ain't the only one. You ain't the only one that's got feelings that you've been repressing and holding back. And the thing is, the reason why you don't see it in other people so much is because other people are scared too. This is an opportunity for you to be a champion in sharing your feelings about certain things. Other people will resonate and other people won't. Some people will say, I'm not getting down with that. I'm not ready to share my emotions. I don't want to go there. It's terrifying. You do you, but I'm going to stay over here. And that's fine too. It really is. But if you are in the headspace right now, or if maybe you're in a point in your life where you feel like, maybe I want to do a little more work. Maybe I want to become a better version of myself. And maybe I'm ready to unpack some of that old crap from my childhood on my own. Look at it, look at the fear, look at the feelings, get connected to it, and maybe evolve in who I am as an individual. Then this is the podcast for you. And not only this episode, but you know what? Go back and listen to some of the earlier ones. 3 ways. I've always got my 3 ways. 3 ways that you can cultivate emotional intelligence, your own sense of emotional intelligence. Here you go. Number 1, you have to be self-aware. You have to do the introspection. You got to look into yourself and say, what am I walking away from? What am I pushing down? And if you want to get your hands really dirty, sit down with your journal and write out all of the relationships that you've been in that have fallen apart because you weren't available emotionally, you were not vulnerable, you maybe you failed at intimacy. And keep in mind, intimacy is not about sex. You, 2 guys, 2 girls, 2 women, 2 men in a platonic friendship can have intimacy. In fact, it's required. In order to have a bond, you need to have an intimate emotional connection with them for it to be the rich experience that we all want to have. So intimacy has nothing to do with sex. There is sexual intimacy for sure, but intimacy is about being vulnerable in a connection with another human. That's it. And if you are not emotionally intelligent as far as doing the introspection and knowing yourself fully, then that's kind of a short stop there. That's not going to happen for you, because if you don't know who you are, how the hell are you going to get to know someone else? And how are you going to be fully connected to somebody else if you can't share the parts of yourself that you've been vulnerable to yourself first? You can't be vulnerable to them either. So when you hide that part of yourself away from yourself, you hide it from others. And you can't receive what they want to share because it shows up for you as a trigger. When somebody is vulnerable to you, it feels uncomfortable because it's, the subconscious says, hey, you need to share too, and you don't want to. So number 1, practice self-awareness. Dig deep, get out your journal, look at those parts of yourself that you want to correct. Listen, you cannot be self-deprecating in this. If you are harming yourself emotionally and you're talking down to yourself, none of this matters. You have to practice love and kindness and awareness of yourself in looking at the things that you want to shore up and improve. So number 1, you got to get to know yourself. What are the areas that you need to fix? How can you become more vulnerable to other people? What is it about your own emotions you fear? Those are some questions you can ask. Number 2, empathize with other people. Often, when we are not in touch with our own emotions, we can be very steadfast in ignoring and avoiding the emotions in other people because, like I said, when somebody shows up in a vulnerable space for you, it can be overwhelming because it begs you to do the same. And if you're not ready, then you're going to avoid, detract, dismiss, ignore whatever it is they're going through. And if that's a person that you care about, that person's going to see you as not caring. Has that happened? Have you done that before? Get out your journal, write it down. Love yourself enough and look at all of these features. Dig deep. This is a wonderful opportunity for your own healing and growth. And to be vulnerable with another human, and I can say this because I've struggled with it too. But to be vulnerable to someone else is to trust, is to allow them in. And guess what? You know what? When you do that, you open yourself up to being hurt again. Because some people are going to hurt you. When you're vulnerable in that intimate space, some people may take advantage of that and harm you. And the thing is that it's okay. It's okay, because when you're open to the potential for that connection. But if you live in fear, you'll never have it, because you'll never be open to it. So empathize, develop empathy. Look at that person that you want to connect to. What is it that they're seeking? Don't make assumptions. Talk, communicate, be open, allow them to share, be receptive. Don't be judgmental. Connect. It's a practice. It's not going to be perfect at first. You have to do your homework in order to get there. But instead of looking at someone through a lens of bias, when you're not emotionally intelligent, like for me on the instance with the woman who was running the x-ray machine, I immediately just assumed that she was wrong, and I talked to her that way. I didn't have any empathy for her. Why should I? I'm doing a job. I'm her manager. This was my mindset. She should receive the corrective behavior because she's the one that screwed up, black and white. You can't have that in relationships, even in work relationships. She's not going to want to work with me if she knows I'm going to hammer her every time she does something wrong. And not only that, it makes her anxious. She doesn't want to come to work anymore. You see how this can fracture and break down the very essence of any relationship you could be in? So develop empathy. Actively listen. Take on their perspective. Try to look at things from their perspective. All right? Number 3, improve your own self-regulation. And I cannot stress this enough. When you allow your environment to dysregulate you emotionally, you shut down and you avoid even feeling your emotions, it's because you don't know how to manage your own reactions to things. This is where journaling and meditation and breath work and therapy. If you're to a certain part of the population, if you have struggles with anger, especially if you're using alcohol, that, my friend, is something that I highly recommend that you seek a professional intervention model in order to help you get that handled. And listen, pot, meet kettle. I drank, I abused alcohol, and then I became dysregulated, and my anger and my emotions were all over the place, and I was just a mess. This was a few years ago, not even that long ago, actually. But alcohol makes it worse. So if you're drinking and you're having trouble and struggles with your anger, I lovingly implore you to love yourself enough to go speak to someone and say, look, I need to get this stuff in check. This is an opportunity for my healing and my growth, and I need your help. I can't stress it enough. Your stress management techniques, if you don't know how to manage your stress, then you're starting, well, you're listening to this podcast, so that's part of it. You're educating yourself. You are loving yourself, shifting your perspective about how you see yourself showing up in the world. Are you a good person? If you're not, why not? Take out a journal and write it down and be honest, and don't be deprecating. Set goals. Set goals for your emotions. Set goals for how you want to react in certain conditions. Create scenarios. Jot that down. Write down, if so-and-so says this to me, this is how I'm going to respond. And use it as target practice. Use it as an opportunity to test yourself and your ability to not allow yourself to get out of control. And honor yourself in that process. You deserve it. You deserve to be able to have the tools that will help you create loving and lasting relationships with people, regardless of the nature of those relationships, family, loved ones, partners, professional relationships, it doesn't matter. When you have the ability to cultivate your own bandwidth of emotional intellect, then your ability to connect and be seen as a safe space, I'm not even kidding, your relationships will blossom as a result. I am so thrilled to share this with you. I'm so thrilled to be able to share my own experiences with cultivating my own emotional intelligence. And it's a process. There's no end zone here. This is a constant technique, just so you know. There's no end goal. The end goal is constantly moving. So the more you work, the more you evolve, the more you heal, the more you experience your own joy, and you step out of fear, that fear of your own emotions, and into love. All right. This has been a Lee Bird Media production. Don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe. Thanks for listening.